Chess enthusiasts, I hope you are all doing well. Today, I have an exhilarating chess game that was played between Stash, the splendid chess engine known for its high-speed analysis, and myself. In this game, I made daring sacrifices, including my knight and bishop, to expose Stash's kingside after initiating the Sicilian defense. This game is truly mind-blowing, so let's dive into it. I started the game with e4, and black responded with c5, followed by e6, which is known as the French variation of the Sicilian. Here, black can advance their pawn to d5, place their knight on c6, and develop their pieces naturally. White typically responds with the Alpine variation, playing pawn to c3 and pawn to d4. Alternatively, white can bring out the knight to c3, but I opted for g3, known as the kingside fumetto, to activate the bishop in the fumetto variation and defend the d5 square along with the knight on c3. In this position, black played b6, mimicking my moves. Later, when I played queen e2, it exerts pressure on the half-open e-file. After castling, it's not ideal to move out the bishop or knight. The best move is to play pawn to d5, striking in the center despite the challenging e-file. After captures on d5, the queen becomes active in the center. You might consider knight to c3 to attack the queen, but black can counter with knight to d4, attacking the queen with a check. Even if you capture the queen on d5, as black can win a piece, regardless of your queen's move, black can execute a strong attack by capturing the knight on c3, which is well defended. Returning to the position, black didn't play pawn to d5 due to perceived risks, instead opting for pawn to d6, which looks attractive but also creates limited space for black. I responded by playing pawn to c3, preparing to invade and attack in the center with d4. After captures occurred on the d4 square, my opponent immediately played pawn to d5. In this position, I believe playing bishop to e7 or other natural-looking moves like a5 would have been better. However, they chose to strike immediately with pawn to d5, aiming to activate their bishop's diagonal. By playing knight to a5, followed by knight to c4 and rook to c8, they could overwhelm my queenside position, although it would require several moves to accomplish. Playing d5 also creates weaknesses on the e5 and c5 squares, prompting me to play pawn to e5 to lock down the position and gain more space on the board. Now, with the knight under attack, some might consider playing knight to d7, but that could create vulnerabilities around the bishop's diagonal and their overall position. I opted to exert pressure by playing knight to c3, and after the bishop moves to b4, I can apply more pressure with knight to b5, targeting the center and queenside. Regardless of their move, whether castle or a6, I can continue to apply pressure by playing bishop to g5, attacking the queen. Even if they move their bishop back to e7, I can still attack with knight to d6, pinning their bishop to the queen. After their rook moves to b8, I can capture their bishop, gaining a strong outpost for my knight on d6 in the center. Going back to the position, knight to d7 is not the correct move. Instead, moving the knight back to g8, the home square, to play knight to e7 and knight to f5 would be more active and open up the queen's diagonal. Following knight c3, bishop moves, and bishop to g5 attacking the queen. Some might consider playing pawn to f6, but that would not be effective as I can capture the pawn and gain an advantage by capturing the pawn on e6. In response, my opponent blocked the attack with knight to e7, indicating potential moves to f5 or g6. After I moved my knight to b5, it became clear that my knight controlled vulnerable squares on the queen side. I even considered playing pawn to a3 to eliminate the dark square bishop. However, my opponent responded with pawn to a6 to kick out my bishop first, prompting me to play pawn to a3, rendering their bishop overwhelmed. With the bishop removed from the game, I gained control of the d6 square for my knight outpost. After captures occurred in the game, my d6 square became a strong outpost for my knight, and his rook gained control of the open h-file. When the knight moved back to c6 to defend the d6 square, I played h3 to prepare queen to d2, attacking the g5 pawn. My opponent responded with pawn to a6, and after knight takes b4, I seized the opportunity to attack with queen to d2, targeting the knight and pawn simultaneously. following a5, knight captures, and bishop to a6 to attack the rook, the d3 square became vulnerable. The knight could come there, and my opponent could apply pressure by playing knight to e7, followed by knight to f5 and rook to c8 to control the open c-file. I defended by playing rook to c8 and then knight back to c2. I offered knight exchanges, which my opponent declined. I played pawn to h3, setting up captures on e6 or f7 after bishop to h3. My opponent initiated defense with queen to d7 and later played rook to c8. When I played bishop to h3 to pressure the e6 pawn, I reinforced my knight on g2 and played knight to f4 to intensify the pressure on e6. This weakened my opponent's positional structure. After the king moved, I brought my rook to a3 to support my rook on c3 for a stronger attack. Additionally, my rook could move to f3 to target the king side. After the king moved, my rook moved to b3, and then to c3, creating pressure on the knight. And let me tell you a quote in Sutton. Don't wait for someone to bring you flowers. Plant your own garden and decorate your own soul. My opponent's pawn to a4 strategically controlled the b3 square, limiting my pawn's movement and allowing their bishop to block my rooks along the c-file. After the knight moved back and my rook moved to h6, instead of playing knight to f4, I chose knight to e3 and then knight to g4 to attack the rook. My opponent moved their rook back, the only viable option. After I moved my knight to f3, my queen gained an open diagonal, and after the king moved, I made a bold and strategic move with knight to f6, sacrificing the knight right on the board, because if you dare to capture it I can easily capture it back, forcing your knight to move, and as the knight moves on g6, I can initiate an attack playing queen g5, noticing that h5 is coming. And your knight has to retreating square to safeguard his position, which is why after the rook moves to the g8 square, I can play pawn to h5, attacking the knight. From there, you can see that your knight has no safe square, forcing it back to h8 for protection. After I check your king on h6 and it moves away, I can apply heavy pressure by playing rook takes c6. You're trying to protect your pieces by retreating to bad squares, but I'm sacrificing pieces similar to Mikhail Tal in his games. Tal often sacrifices pieces, yet still manages to checkmate opponents with just a pawn. After bishop captures, my knight moves to e5, pressuring your queen and bishop. Your knight can't capture it now. Then, with queen to a7 and rook up, I can play rook takes c6, overwhelming your position. If you play rook to c8 to eliminate my rook, I can capture the pawn on e6 due to it being pinned to the queen, leading to a deceptive advantage for white. At this juncture, we see that capturing the knight with the pawn is not possible. After that, the queen moves to b7, you can see that I initiate further pressure by playing knight to g5, aiming to apply more pressure in the center structure. It's evident that your pawn structure has weak potential. If you dare to play a normal move like rook to c8, I can execute a strategic move by capturing the pawn on e6, sacrificing the knight to recapture with the knight. Then, your king has no squares to run except the f7 square. After I check with the knight and the king moves back, I can play queen to f4, establishing a decisive advantage for me, with your king paralyzed and unable to move because of the knights. When the knight moves back to d8 to protect that square, I can capture it on c8 with the rook. After the recapture, I can capture on the d5 square, creating a decisive advantage for me with a discovered check. After the king moves to e7, I can play a bold move, pawn to d5, weakening your position significantly. My knight and rook, along with other pieces, join forces to attack your king, leading to a game-ending position for you. Going back to the position, instead of playing normal moves or any usual strategies, you decided to play g takes f6, which is a viable move to consider. After the recaptures occur. In this position, some may be tempted to play knight to g6, which seems natural and logical. However, I can apply more pressure by playing bishop to f1, offering a bishop exchange. After the exchange you might consider playing rook to c8, but I can overwhelm your position by playing queen to c2, creating a triple queen-rook battery for a heavy attack along this file. Your knight will then be under attack, making your pieces and positions vulnerable. This could lead to a destructible position, ultimately ending the game. Going back to the position, we see that knight to g6 is not feasible due to its vulnerability. Therefore, after the knight moves back to g8, intending to play rook to f6 followed by rook takes f6, I chose to play queen to f4. Subsequently, I decided to even sacrifice my knight and bishop on the e6 square, making a bold and strategic sacrifice. Though you didn't capture the bishop, let me illustrate what would happen if you dared to do so. If you captured the bishop on e6, I would capture it with my knight, forking your rook and king simultaneously. After the king moves, I would give you another check by playing knight to c7, forcing your king to move and allowing me to easily capture your bishop on the b5 square. At this point, your knight would be under attack, and regardless of your move, whether you choose rook to c8 or not, my queen could initiate an attack by playing queen to d6, increasing pressure against your knight and attacking your king simultaneously. This would lead to a decisive advantage for me. If you attempted to save your knight by playing knight to a5, I would initiate an attack by playing rook to c6, overwhelming your position. This is because my rook would control the 7th rank, enhancing my attacking options and rendering your rear position vulnerable. So let me motivate you by making a quote for you. Do what you feel in your heart to be right, for you'll be criticized anyway. You'll be damned if you do, and damned if you don't. Reflecting on all the variations, we see that if f takes e6 was not played, instead opting for rook to h6, the game takes a different course. The f6 pawn is under attack by the knight and the rook. At this point, I thought that knight takes f7 would lead to rook takes f6, attacking both the knight and the queen simultaneously. The knight on c6 is protecting the rook on d8, which is why, after capturing the pawn on f7, if I were to protect the rook with the knight, the rook could be captured by the knight. The idea behind this move is that after you capture, I can easily take your pawn on f7, attacking your rook. You can see that your rook is not supported by the knight because I eliminated the knight one move ago. After he captures the f6 pawn, it becomes evident that he is attacking my queen, bishop, and rook. The knight can no longer protect the d8 rook, so I decided to capture the rook on d8. If you dare to save your queen by playing queen to g7, I can attack by capturing your bishop after playing queen to e5. After he captures and I capture your queen, your bishop and rook are both under attack. He decided to play bishop to f7, and after I capture, he recaptured, and I played rook to c6. You can see that I have one rook and one knight against your two minor pieces, which gives me a clear advantage because I have more pawns. Gradually, I progress in the game, exchanging your knights for my rook. After I capture your last pawn and push all my pawns, including my d-pawn, I exchange pieces and ultimately push the h-pawn, forcing you to checkmate. It was a wonderful and spectacular game that I thoroughly enjoyed playing. If you enjoyed my game, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Wish you all the best. Bye bye, see you.